Hello, everyone. Welcome back to
Oh,
our podcast on this Earth Day. So happy Earth Day. Well, fellow lovely and not so lovely Earthlings. Which one of y'all is lovely and not lovely? You'll have to ask your therapist because I don't really know. So, welcome back to the podcast officially now titled "The Blind Leading the Blind." Which one's the leader? Which one's the follower? I couldn't really tell you. Maybe it's a republic. Maybe it's an autocracy. Who knows?
I don't know. We're both blind, so it could be either or, interchangeable.
So,
Oh, and by the way, since it is Earth Day, it's very topical that we've chosen world building, right?
indeed, today's topic is world building. But first, for those of you who are new, some quick introductions. Coming at you live from Washington, D.C., a lovely, also not so lovely city, depending on what you think, is Kunal, writer, artist, painter, and programmer somehow all in 24 hours a day. Over there in the questionable state of New Jersey, we have.
Questionable indeed. Yeah, got Emily over here. I don't know, writer, artist, photographer, lover of thrift shopping. You know what I'm gonna do? Each time we record this, I'm just gonna add in a new descriptive.
Sure, totally.
It's a
I
new
will
random thing
charge
that I
you.
do.
I will charge you $5 for each descriptive. So
Okay, so this one was thrifting. We'll see what I'll do next time.
yeah, absolutely. And indeed, folks, today, as you know, on Earth Day, yeah, we are doing one of my favorite topics in all of writing and fiction, which is world building, a very appropriate topic indeed for today. Um, World building is a warning to our dear listeners out there. For one, it's very definitely rooted in speculative fiction. So sorry, Joe, who loves true crime. We're probably not going to get much into true crime this time. Um, Second
Yeah.
thing to warn is that we're probably not going to be able to dive into every aspect of world building very deeply because it
Don't have enough time. It's
it's
such a broad
not, there's not
topic.
enough time. There are books written on world building. There
Yeah.
are channels on YouTube dedicated to world building that dive into each of these aspects in turn, spending like 30, 40 minutes, sometimes even an hour. Um, so we'll do our best. It's gonna be kind of an intro. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be action packed. There's gonna be drama, melodrama, screaming. Probably not.
Some
Hopefully not.
tears, a little bit of blood. That's all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, that's all right. It's how these podcasts typically go. They
Yeah,
devolve into
you'll get
anarchy
used to it.
fighting, anarchy fighting, screaming because that's just what we do here. Um, no, but for real though, getting into the actual topic, what is world building? And I guess like it's kind of a very nebulous term, don't you think? It's being reductive is we would say it's building a world, which kind of a bad way to introduce it, but it is very much a nebulous concept. There's so many parts to world building to define what it is.
I think you like if you are the person that is world building yourself, sort of like a preview into what we're going to talk about later, but I do feel as though different parts of different worlds that exist is really up to the creator in what they want to focus on. So that's why, yeah, it's like each world that you can find in media, they're all going to feel different, not only because of the literal settings and the characters and the times and all that, but just because of the story itself. I feel like you cannot separate the world from the actual story in which the world is relevant.
Sure. I mean, it's also interesting because world building, I feel like for a lot of different media, sometimes it's more obvious that this is a very deep, complex world, and other worlds, it's a little bit less so. What's really interesting, I think, I mean, world building encompasses so many things, right? It encompasses history, it encompasses societies, cultures, languages, it can be geography, which is kind of I guess, the Earth Day part of this podcast. It can be, I mean, it can literally be geology. I mean, there are stories out there that focus pretty heavily on geology, flora, fauna, like the biology, even, you know, magic systems and technology, even to an extent, kind of get into this.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of things that I think it can be. It's not literally just we're building a planet for our society to sit on. It can be more than that. Um,
Yeah,
and
arguably, you don't have to even make a whole separate planet. I mean, when I think of, for example, Harry Potter, right, that's still taking place in like London, like sort of in the world that we live in.
yeah, the
Yet there's this, what was that?
hidden magical world.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like this world and as opposed to this world is, we're not even thinking about this world?
Hmm. One of these days I'll finish that seventh book, but
You gotta.
I know this is going to turn off a lot of viewers who are like, holy fuck, you have not actually read all seven of the holy Harry Potters. Um, although I guess she's not as holy an author as she used to be.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
But so maybe some people will cheer me on and be like, hey, this guy knows what's up. Um, but yeah, like it's so fascinating how much it spans, right? Like you can definitely do world building where it's a hidden magical world and and like something like Harry Potter, which exists within the framework of our current world and then becomes fantastic. I would actually make the argument that Harry Potter is soft world building, but we'll get to
Hmm.
that part. That's kind of like a preview for later. And in fairness, you can even with sci-fi, you might have, maybe something that's not far future, but like midterm future,
Hmm.
um, is like projecting our current society into the future. So you're not really inventing anything new other than really history in some senses. Like books
Hmm.
like stories like Neuromancer or for other cyberpunk nerds out there, Cyberpunk 2077. Fun fact, actually, Cyberpunk 2077 is almost a direct lift of Neuromancer. It's very dangerously close to plagiarism. Um, these stories, they don't necessarily have to dive into creating like, new culture. Well, they do create new cultures, but they don't invent completely from scratch. They are extending our history and trying to reach an end result. Or even a better example, I guess, is The Handmaid's Tale, which
Mm.
Handmaid's Tale is actually
Gilead.
it's very well known for being so realistic that it actually scares people. And the world building is a big part of that.
You know what's interesting though? So I didn't see all the whole TV show.
I
I
have
just read the book. But so while what you're saying is definitely true, like there's a lot of thematic elements that people see scary parallels to, like with the world that we live in, I still think, at least in terms of like the set for the TV show, they did a lot of creative work in terms of the actual visuals, the aesthetic, the visuals. So I think maybe I guess that's something that could be a little bit different from like film or TV versus like in the book, because in the book you can't spend like, half the chapter just describing visuals. A lot of the visual aspects are filled in just by the reader's own imagination.
That's true.
So,
That's
yeah.
a very, very good point, actually, which is that there is a visual aspect that often for writers you don't really see, but if you're into visual side, I'm a very big visual person. A lot of my stories kind of they come after I've created an art piece. So it's a very whole another aspect of world building, like, what does a car look like maybe in
Hmm.
this world, or, what do things actually look like generally? How do people body language work in
Hmm.
this? I mean, and like we see that with a lot of books that are adapted to shows. So, Lord of the Rings is a great example. It's kind of the prototypical one, but A Song of Ice and Fire, Dune, even these
Hmm.
are all adaptations. And if you read the original text, there's not a ton in there that's
Hmm.
like describing, what exactly like Barad-dûr looks like in Lord of the Rings, for example.
Right.
That's something that Peter Jackson and his visual design team kind of invented. And I guess like with the Song of Ice and Fire and Dune, it's the same thing. There's not actually a lot describing in Dune the like what a still suit looks like, or
Hmm.
what Arrakis. I mean, Arrakis is kind of easy to imagine. It's just a big fucking desert.
Yeah. There's only so much you can do with sand.
I mean, I mean, we hate sand. It's coarse,
Did
soft,
you say we
and
hate
it's
sand?
everywhere, right? Like.
I mean, I'd hate sand if there were worms living in it. Actually, I digress here, but like, I once read about all the little creatures and microorganisms that live in sand on the beach.
There's a lot. There's a
There's a lot.
there's a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, it really shocked people. But and feeding into that,
Mhm.
there, right? You can. I mean, that's another sort of interesting point to me. World building can be as granular as like microbiology. There are
Yeah.
depth stories out there that get into it. So I guess like we've kind of like sort of been skating on it, but the next thing I guess we kind of are should look at is like what are some of the best examples of world building out there? I mean, I guess
Mhm.
the obvious one really is Lord of the Rings, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the most prototypical example of of like a very hard world building, the first sort of like one with hard rules and whatnot, I would imagine, right?
Mhm. You know, it's crazy though, since we were sort of talking about like the differences between world building in text versus on screen. I, at this point, cannot imagine reading the Lord of the Rings books without imagining what the movies brought. So, like, I can't remember at this point anymore what it was like to have my own initial imagination without the influence of the films.
Yeah, because the books the films are so iconic now, right? I mean,
Yeah.
my somewhat, lukewarm hot take, I actually think the films are better than the books. I mean, the books have not aged well, I think, because writing styles has changed, but it's true.
Hmm.
Lord of the Rings visual design has become so iconic. That idea of Sauron's helm, for example, the way it was designed, or when you think of like an orc, you think of the film probably. You know,
Hmm.
you don't really think of it any other design.
Even Gollum himself. I know that when they were going to make the film, especially there was actually more than one Hobbit film in which like Smeagol Gollum's there. I think there's more than one animated version of that.
There are,
And yeah, and then just even looking at the various ways in which they sketched his character,
yeah,
all of those Smeagol's could have existed, but the one that we all remember is the one that was in, the biggest, most popular
Peter,
film.
the Peter
Yeah.
Jackson, basically. Yeah,
What was what's the guy's name who
Andy
played him?
Serkis.
Do you remember?
Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis. There we go.
He
Yeah.
actually started his own film production company recently. That man's very iconic.
Wow.
What's interesting actually about Lord of the Rings is that a lot of its world building basically established the foundations for world building of fantasy. It's one of those weird things, like how much was Lord of the Rings, like the films now influenced the visual, but arguably the books influenced a lot of the visual art that came later. I would actually not be surprised to find that Peter Jackson probably looked at a lot of things from like Dungeons and Dragons or artistic work done in like all the settings that came after Lord of the Rings in order to
Mhm.
inform his design choices because the idea of an orc was already pretty well established by 2001, I think, when the first film released, or 2000. So there's definitely an interesting interplay there, but that is, I think, the prototypical hard world building. I mean, if you ever try to read Silmarillion, which I mean, I know
I,
people are,
I tried and failed.
I know people are very like mixed on the
I,
Silmarillion.
I mean,
It's
to be fair, it was in like high school, and I tried, and I got to maybe the first 20 pages, and I was like, "What the hell is this guy talking?"
it's hard. It's hard. I tried reading it too. I have not. It's on my shelf somewhere, and maybe I might have lost it by now, but it is a hard book to read. Like
Yes, yes,
it's basically a history book. It's not
it
real
is
story.
exactly.
You need to imagine you're reading a documentary, but it goes to show you just how far back the history goes in that book series.
And I feel like it also goes to show like how dedicated Tolkien was to like the language
Yeah.
that he had created.
Oh yeah.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, like I didn't know what he was talking about half the time. And the
Well,
different names
hmm.
that all kind of sounded similar. It's actually kind of funny. Again, another tangent here. It kind of reminds me of The Master and Margarita. So like if you read that book, there's that's all right, but there's so many I think it's a Russian thing. So like you have your name and then your last name is it's called the patronymic name. It like comes from your father. But
Hmm.
like in the Master and Margarita, there were so many characters that
Hmm.
had like very closely similar names that I was like, "Wait, what?" So it reminds me, no, it reminds me of the Silmarillion because Tolkien, he was like into making his own names, his own language, and everyone ended with like Uthian, Ian, this and I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. It's
wait,
impossible to follow. I totally agree. And
yeah.
I mean, what's interesting is that like Tolkien famously, when he wrote The Lord of the Rings, he's a professor. He was a professor of linguistics, which
Hmm.
I think anybody who's a nerd at this point probably does know the basics of Tolkien.
Hmm.
Um, he's a professor of linguistics. He famously invented Elvish and Orcish and Dwarvish. These are all separate languages. That was where his world started. He's the
Hmm.
original conlang, or conlang being constructed language, the original person who did constructed languages.
Hmm.
And it's definitely established, I think, the mold for worlds going, you know.
Hmm.
That said, I do think that we've kind of gone beyond him a little bit. I mean,
You know, I think the next big, like the big, I can't say prototype, but like the master of that world building that inspired, that world building style that inspired so many like offshoots. I think the next one would probably be Harry Potter. Because, no, think about it. After Harry Potter became big, how many different fantasy magic school
settings.
stories came out?
Here's one thing I will say that's interesting about Harry Potter, and I don't know how many people are going to agree with me on this, but this is kind of my interpretation. And
Mhm.
admittedly, I'm not a super fan and kind of gave up after the sixth book. But um, what's interesting about Harry Potter is that Harry Potter is actually a very good example of something called soft world building, where I mean, anything with hard versus soft, you'll hear it a lot. Hard magic versus soft magic. Hard world building versus soft building is very similar, where the idea is one is very clearly defined, very hard rules, very specific things. Harry Potter definitely leans in a little bit more softer. It's not so much about that things are necessarily consistent across the books. If you notice that new elements oftentimes will come in and they sort of don't always line up perfectly in sync. I mean,
What example do you have of that? Because nothing's coming to mind off the top of my head.
well, if you think about it, there's that device that Hermione uses in book three to turn back time.
The Time Turner. Uh-huh.
Turner. And if you think about it, that's kind of introduced only in book three. And as far as I remember, it never comes back again. Right.
That's true. That's
And
true. Yeah, it doesn't.
which is an interesting sort of thing, right? Like, because this is a little bit more maybe magic systems than really is world building, but
Mhm.
really about the experiential consistency of Harry Potter. It's not so much about, being logically consistent because, if such a device exists, right? Well, why don't we just use them and go back, strangle Voldemort in his cradle, and we're done, right?
I think there was a limit. I could be wrong. I think there was like a time limit that you could turn back, if I remember correctly.
I don't remember the novels very well, and I'm probably going to catch some flack for this, but it's definitely
Our
it's definitely a series that started. And if you actually read some of the interviews with J.K. Rowling, assuming you still want to see anything from her at all at this point, she actually does talk about how she never actually really planned much in Harry Potter. She just kind of came up with shit and just went with it,
Mhm,
which leads to a world that's not necessarily 100% consistent with its internal logic. I bet you there are definitely things there from what I remember. I think the
mhm,
Time Turner might have been it, but maybe I'm
mhm,
wrong, right? But you'll notice that each book is introducing very different things very quickly. And
mhm.
I might be wrong. It might be that it is a very textbook hard world building example, and it's just that it was.
No, I feel like I understand what you're saying. I think it kind of makes me think of one of the reasons why I admire how she did that in a way. So I say it from a perspective of someone who is currently writing a quite lengthy fantasy novel. I have spent a lot of time thinking about world building, working on the world and all that. What I actually think is quite clever about what she did, and I also think of like authors like Neil Gaiman, who apparently is also in hot water right now, but that's another that's
Another
another thing.
another one who's definitely had a fall from grace, no doubt.
All of our favorite authors are just like, oh, guys. Okay, anyway, so that aside. So basically, both of these two authors that are pretty well known, they basically made an extension of the world that we already live in. So something that I think fantasy authors, whether they're published or whether they're aspiring fantasy authors, have struggled with and do struggle with is not just info dumping if they created a whole new world of their own with the beauty of Harry Potter setting and maybe like Neverwhere, Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere, is that there's so much information that the reader just already knows. They already know. Like they are already familiar with like the world that we live in. And the thing that I think J.K. Rowling does really, really well, if she did well, I thought it was clever, it was a good idea, is that she didn't really introduce too many new creatures or concepts, really. And if she did introduce them, they were so well spaced out that at no point did the reader just go like, okay, hold on, like what? Okay, first you said this existed, now this other made up thing exists, now this thing exists, because you don't want to overwhelm your reader because your reader's going to put down your book.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I personally, I'm not going to name what I read specifically, but I have read books.
Name and shame. Come on, let's do it.
No, no, I'm not going to do that. But I have read books where I got through like the first 20 pages, and the amount of like over description, over explanation,
Yeah,
over unfamiliar names, I was just like, okay,
too
I need
much.
to, yeah,
I,
this is too
I,
much.
jokes aside, I am genuinely curious, like which books you're talking about, because
I'll,
I have one in mind too.
I'll tell you after podcast.
Okay, fine,
I don't
fine.
want to put anyone on blast.
I guess I guess Emily's a little bit afraid of of critiquing someone too much.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe a little.
but I mean, I will say like what I will say about J.K. Rowling's books is that the way she introduces her world, the vehicle basically is that, you know, you're going through the new world with the same time as Harry Potter is. Harry Potter is a student at the school. It's actually a really great way to naturally introduce people to a world because the character is also not very well aware of what's going on in the world.
Mhm.
Um, Neil Gaiman's sort of stories are very interesting as well. He falls in a style where his worlds are actually very fleshed out. There are actually a lot of very copious amounts of notes on how they work, but you only ever really see about 10% of it at any given time. So you kind of get the best of like the soft world building approach where you can have that experiential consistency, but you also have hard world building where, you know,
Back end that you might not see.
yeah, everything's that's like kind of hidden from there.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, we talk about info dumps as well, actually. Like, if you want a series that will, one of my favorite worlds actually is the Malazan series, which is a world that will basically just dumps you right in the middle, and it doesn't actually exposition dump you so much as it expects you just to figure out what's going on.
Well,
Um,
speaking of just figure out what's going on, that reminds me of Elden Ring.
So Elden Ring is we both love Elden Ring
Yeah.
on this podcast here. And what's interesting about Elden Ring, I remember I was watching a breakdown of soft world building from one of my favorite YouTubers, which is Hello Future Me, Timothy Hickson. He's got his own Patreon and like Discord. Kind of a shout out to him. But if any of you guys are interested in like fantasy world building writing, he kind of specializes in it. So
What was his name again?
Timothy Hickson, Hello Future Me. Right.
Okay.
Um, so what's interesting about Elden Ring and Dark Souls is that these are very squarely they fall into the category of soft world building.
Hmm.
Um, what what that means is that there isn't necessarily a strong like amount of like rules or whatnot going on. Although again, people will probably disagree on this a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if
Um,
I don't feel like it's soft or hard. Do we have what's in between soft and hard world building?
yeah, but it's not like explicitly a Song of Ice and Fire, which is kind of the other end of the spectrum, I think, where
Mm,
we have like these houses, these things, and this and that. Most of the time, you don't really know what's going on. You just know that you're in a dark, broken world. You're kind of
mm,
taking actions, and there's a lot of environmental storytelling in this series. It does something that a lot of games don't do, which is that it kind of just lets the medium be the means of storytelling and of introducing you to the world. There's a very great YouTuber. If you're at all a Soulsborne fan, it's probably you've heard of him. His name is Vati Vidya.
Oh,
And
I know.
yeah,
Yeah.
everyone who's played these series of games knows
Yeah.
him. He is this dude from Australia who goes and finds all the item descriptions and takes all the dialogue
Yeah.
and everything and collates it and is actually able to piece together the story of Elden Ring and Dark Souls and all these things. And there is stuff there, actually. It's not.
A lot. So I was gonna say I feel like whether or not you ask me, do I think Elden Ring is like soft world building or hard world building would depend. It would my answer would completely change depending on if I just played the game and didn't watch all the lore videos,
Yeah.
or if I did watch all the lore videos. Because I feel the lore videos sort of put all the little puzzle pieces together in the game that
There's
sort of they like blow my mind with how much thought and information and effort and planning really went on probably in the creation of the game. But if you don't think about it, you don't pay attention, which I would argue most people probably wouldn't. So Elden Ring is probably the first game that I've ever played of like that style in which I had to do the majority of my research on what was going on in the game, like separately from actually playing the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the few games series out there that is very infamous for not holding hands. And
Yeah.
that comes from like, not just the gameplay, but also like just the world that you're in. What is interesting is that the reason it's probably not considered very hard world building is that there's a lot of things that kind of don't really make sense if you think about it. Like, how are you going from the plains right into a bog, right? For example, if you think about it, it's kind of sort of explained magic. The idea, though, is that they're not really looking necessarily to build a logical, cohesive
Mm,
world with a lot of rules. It's about delivering a particular kind of experience, a bleak, despair-filled experience in which you're trying to kind of find meaning in essence. I mean, there's a lot of like and or just kind of survive in. It's Elden Ring, in my opinion, is very deeply existential in some ways, but that might be also someone reading a little bit too much into it. But what it,
I'm actually curious. Could you briefly
why
mention, like,
so
say why? Yeah,
existential?
no, because now I'm curious.
Well, I mean, look at the world in Elden Ring, a little bit less to a lesser extent, but also the Dark Souls series. These are very dark, bleak worlds. People just die over and over, right?
Um,
When they give up, quote unquote, give up, they or eventually, like if they die enough, they hollow out. They become husks, which in some ways kind of touches on some existential philosophy, the concept of like, becoming like so deep in despair that you just stop, it just doesn't matter anymore. And instead, you as the player kind of are persevering against an uncaring, cold, and at times absurd universe with crazy monsters that could kill you at any minute. There
mm.
are definitely elements of the existential. You'll see videos online of people who are like, "No, I was depressed and like I played this game." I'm not kidding. Like, people are like, "I was depressed and like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the game actually like kind of gave me a vehicle for pushing past it." Right?
I
There,
remember the first thing I said, like I didn't know what I was getting into. I just heard Elden Ring was great, and my
yeah,
first thought when I was playing the game, like the first hour, I was like, I feel like I'm playing a game in hell.
yeah. I mean, that's what everyone says,
Why?
right? And what's
Literally everything's trying to kill you.
yeah, it's just
We
like
could do a whole podcast just talking about Elden Ring.
we
I would
should,
love that.
we should definitely just talk about just our experiences with the game series.
Oh my God, we should.
That would be a very fun topic. But
Yeah.
that's a series that does have world building, but it's subtle, it's not very obvious, it's not always very consistent. Not
Mhm.
trying to build, a Lord of the Rings or Song of Ice and Fire style world. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean the Malazan series shares this in common with Elden Ring. You're not actually told a lot explicitly. You kind of have to dig for it a little bit and or maybe even look it up in some cases.
You know what? Okay, so I guess in contrast to Elden Ring, a world that I think was done really well without like, you know how they describe Elden Ring as a world? You know how there's art styles that are like very, very, very like they have small fine details, you know?
Yeah,
Like
they're very
each
like
little piece of the artwork is like super tiny.
yeah,
What I would say, and now the one I'm thinking about is Pandora from James Cameron's Avatar. That
I have thoughts.
opposite is the opposite. That world, if I could describe it like a piece of artwork or a painting, is just like super colorful, super flashy, super fun. And like you could tell, yeah, a lot of work was put into it, but the feeling of receiving it as the audience is just like not so meticulous. Not so meticulous. Maybe like a few splashes of paint there, a few up there, green down there, red over there. Pandora was so well done in that they weren't trying to spend ages trying to tell you about the world. You were immersed in it, you saw it, it worked seamlessly with the plot.
I've never explored Pandora much, honestly. I mean,
Um,
admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of those films. They're all right. They're all
Wait,
right.
why? I love them.
I don't know, just too shallow for my taste. That movie came out the same year as District 9, which arguably
Okay.
is a far superior film. Which actually doesn't. I mean, not to get on the Pocahontas is Avatar train, but there are
Okay.
a lot of striking similarities between the two. It's a
Yeah,
very
I can see that.
it's a very Disney-fied version, I think, of sci-fi and talking about topics like colonialism and corporate extraction. And
Okay, so thematically, yes, I would agree with that. but I'm so blown away by the visuals. Like I love the visuals of those movies. I'm a sucker for that. So
And the visual design is striking, and like you can definitely see a lot of the carryover from James Cameron's work on Aliens, right? Uh,
mhm.
there's a lot of strong visual language there. I wonder how much world building was actually done in those. I would not be surprised if Pandora is actually again pretty soft at some point because
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked
probably
by that
is
either.
not a lot behind a lot of those various things, right? A lot
I
of
mean,
it,
basically he took like the idea of just, colonial exploitation and he just put it in this other world. And if you really think about it, everything in the Avatar movies, it's all drawn from I guess you could say that about any world. I was going to say it's all drawn from something that we have here that already exists.
and
From,
there's a, I mean, there is an interesting sort of thing, and it's kind of a little bit of a segue into some next topics, but
Mhm.
that's true, right? Like there are definitely worlds that do that. I mean, Dune is very much a drawing from the Middle
Yeah.
East, right? Like you have Lawrence of Arabia, which was itself based on a real story going on in there, and drawing from like the idea of janissaries and whatnot. A Song of
Mhm.
Ice and Fire is actually based on the War of the Roses, which was the Civil War that happened in England. I think it was the 1400s, 15. I forget when, but like that's
Yeah.
what it's actually based off of. In fact, the continent of Westeros, it's actually basically just England or the Isles, right? The English Isles and like all that, or
Yeah.
that
And the Dothraki,
yeah, it's that whole English
just basically
Isle
across the water. They're
upside
basically like
down.
Mongols.
Yeah, so it's upside down though, right? It's the map
Yeah.
of England. It's just upside down and much bigger. The Dothraki are analogous to the Mongolians, especially. As
Hmm.
absolutely right. Um,
Didn't George R. R. Martin, he studied English history?
yeah, it's English history. So the Targaryens are actually based off of the Normans, actually, who ruled the England for like I think roughly a century or two, and actually were the ones who did not speak English. They spoke French, right?
Mhm.
And that's actually what introduced French words. So absolutely, like you will find a lot of these cases where real history does leak into world building, and it's very common. In fact, I'd imagine that I would bet that more worlds than not on this list, save for maybe the Malazan series. The Malazan series actually is written by an anthropologist, and I cannot recommend that series more. It's actually a very unique sort of study of what sort of how the cyclical rise of all civilizations and the concept of like, something akin to a Roman Empire. Um,
Mm.
how that sort of interacts. It's worth a read, very hard to get into, but very rewarding. But most worlds do draw on some form of real world history. Um,
Yeah.
my only issue with Avatar is that it's very surface level, right? Right, like, and not everything needs to be deep, but I have a bit of a bone to pick with Disney-fied stuff. So,
Mm.
and Avatar definitely is not as egregious, I think, as some Disney works are, but that's a that's a whole nother
A whole
soapbox,
whole other podcast.
whole nother podcast. That's our catchphrase at some point.
Yeah, right? Oh my God, we don't have enough time to talk about everything.
Well, this is a very dense topic too, right?
It is.
I mean, so we started touching on this a little bit, right? Which is that the different aspects of world building, and I guess like what we kind of maybe haven't really asked is what aspects of world building made those worlds that we've kind of talked about tangentially great. We touched on it a little bit, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, okay, so are we gonna go like all the way back? Like Harry Potter, what made that so great? I think probably I don't know, what made Harry Potter so great.
Hmm.
I still really think just the fact that she combined these mythological fantasy aspects with a school and targeted the book towards children was just like the winning combination. So it wasn't just, oh, here's this magical world, this magical environment. It's in a school. You have literally adults there teaching you about it.
Yeah.
You have parents that are also doing magic with you. Like, I think like Ron Weasley's parents and like they stole his dad's car. Like, I think that's what made it really cool in that time.
It's very grounded.
Yeah, yeah, like that's because if you think about it, like there's nothing, exceptional about wizards and witches and dragons. Like that's all been done. Like, but how she put it into her world is what I think made that great.
Somewhat hot take, actually. I think that like even magic schools are not a new concept. That's actually has pre-existed before Harry Potter.
So
It's
what do you think set Harry Potter apart?
um well, I mean, I have a very hot take on why, but if I had to be objective about it,
Wait, no,
it
I'm curious.
my hot
Okay.
take, my hot
Yeah.
take, my hot take is it came out at the right time. It came out at the time
Right.
that a generation of people who had just sort of started exploring. I mean, it kind of came on the cusp of the millennial age where technology itself was becoming more and more magical, right? And it's sort of offered like almost a mirror, right, for a lot of people growing up with a world that was changing very rapidly, slowly, right? A lot of it was timing, I think. It came at the right time.
So I definitely agree that when I first read those books, I probably was at the exact right age to enjoy that.
Yeah.
But having been a kid that was introduced to tech like really late, probably later than, I don't know, some of my other peers,
Things are changing.
don't, I don't think it was. So I'll tell you right now, I didn't get a computer in my house until I was like in seventh grade.
Mhm. Not that crazy.
And so how old are you in seventh grade?
In
You're
seventh,
like 13.
yeah.
So I remember being excited to get like my Hogwarts letter at age 11 when I was 11. Like I was 10 turning 11.
Sure. I mean, but the thing is that it was the right, I think, what I'm trying to say is that it was maybe tech might be the wrong example. I think it was the
Uh-huh.
right cultural touchstone for a generation that was growing up in the time that it did. I mean, obviously a lot of success for any author is just luck, right? I mean, that's a big part.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very reductive. But to the actual merits of Harry Potter, it's very grounded in real world struggles, right? It's not just about like a real world, maybe not struggle, but real world like rituals, even real world, like, life, right? It's
Mhm.
like, as I think the prototypical example is that in that series is that, Harry and Ron have to go to a dance, but they can't find dates. It's at a magical school, though, right?
Mhm.
I mean, chances are, if you grew up in America or really anywhere in the West, that you can relate to that on some level, right? And
Mhm.
like the concept of like, just kind of pulling pranks and whatnot. And it kind of also takes the mundane and makes it more interesting. It's the same reason Lord of the Rings was so popular at its time. Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings at its inception came into a time in the 1950s, which is when life was becoming very mundane, actually, right? You go
In
to
the
work.
1950s?
Yeah, 1950s, 1960s, life had started to become more mundane. You go out, you do your 9 to 5 job, come back home, that's it, right? And there was kind of a craving for, you know, something that was not as mundane, and that's what Lord of the Rings tapped into at the time. There is
So
about this somewhere.
you know what? Sorry. So you know what I would be interested in? I would be interested. I don't know the answer off the top of my head right now, because you mentioned how life became more mundane, like the 1950s, and I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, like that was like right around the end of the Second World War. Now I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, after massive, traumatic events to
Mhm.
like nations, what
Yeah.
kind of books tend to do well versus not at times like that? I would be really interested in looking that up now.
I mean, The Great Gatsby was right after World War One and the Spanish flu pandemic. I mean, which was
Yeah,
arguably
but the thing is that The Great Gatsby kind of like it wasn't The Great Gatsby, the events of the book actually took place kind of like at the same time because Gatsby was coming back from war and
right,
trying to find his love.
right, but
But I think something like Harry Potter, I don't
it didn't follow traumatic events. It followed the turn of the millennium.
Harry Potter. But what inherently makes a turn of the millennium a traumatic event?
There wasn't a traumatic event. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, you said it wasn't. Oh, sorry.
That's right.
Gotcha.
There was no traumatic event, I think. There probably is something there, right? I would be curious in that post-pandemic what we see as becoming popular.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
And
COVID.
what happened? What has become popular? I mean, superhero films have fallen off dramatically, which I think
Yeah,
speaks to
yeah.
very sobering. Um,
I
real-
mean, so I'm also curious too. I know me personally, when the pandemic happened, you'll probably laugh, but like during like the first few months, I just went on like a zombie kick. I played The Last of Us for the first time during the COVID pandemic. I watched Train to Busan for the first time. And like right now, obviously, The Last of Us TV show is doing pretty well. And I assume it's doing pretty well, not only because I mean I'm a fan, so I'm biased, but like the fact they decided to take the second season, the second game, and turn it into two seasons instead of one. Whereas with the first one, they only decided one season. I feel like there definitely was a financial consideration in making that decision. And I'm assuming that it was like, hey guys, like the first season did so well that we can now stretch out the next game into
I have
two
a,
seasons.
so I have a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory for why that
Okay.
was likely.
All right.
My girlfriend and I actually were watching an episode. She's never watched, or she's never played the games, right? I've done
Uh-huh.
a little bit of spoilers, so she had no idea. Okay, spoiler alert for our audience out there. Like, if you haven't seen the show or played the games, we're gonna spoil it right now. So if you
Yeah.
do skip ahead a little bit, um, so when she saw Abby like brutally killing Joel, like
Mhm.
really brutally killing Joel, she was like, "Who the fuck is gonna watch this now?" Right? Like because Pedro Pascal is so well loved, everyone wanted Joel, and she's like, "I
Yeah.
don't get who would be sympathetic to Abby. Like she's just a fucking hypocrite." And like,
Mhm.
sort of like mad. And I mean, we had a whole long debate about, how can one be sympathetic in an increasingly polarized world. But that's
Mhm.
a different story. So, we were, and she was like, I wonder if at the end of the season they actually do kill Abby. And I'm like, I don't know. And now that you've mentioned that there's actually two seasons instead of one for this, my tinfoil hat conspiracy is they're trying to see how people are going to respond to
Interesting.
the idea of Abby not dying. And if any sort of sympathy does build up, they may spare her. I suspect, though, if there's no sympathy, they will kill her at the end of season three. I think it is an economic decision.
Huh. Yeah, that I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. But you know, it's funny that you mentioned about like being sympathetic to Abby. When I played the game, I know they tried to make her sympathetic. And even in the show they kind of tried to make her I never liked Abby.
No one does.
It's
And
just like how you spent like a whole amazing game just connecting us to and something that like I don't know, maybe as a storyteller of a story that spans many years, there's a lot of intricacies, character, all this stuff. Like it wasn't necessary, in my opinion, for Joel to die. It actually confuses me a little bit. I feel like maybe in the game they were like, okay, Joel had his time. Do we want to just make Ellie the main character now? Just for some reason that this doesn't make sense because from a storytelling perspective,
yeah,
I don't know why you would just kill him. They could have had they could have been separated. Maybe Ellie grew up, she did her own thing, like but to kill Joel, this still doesn't make sense to me from a storytelling perspective, as though it
a
couldn't be
lot.
just as good or even better if he was alive.
There's a lot to unpack there. I'm not going to dive into it right this minute, but there is a lot to unpack, I think.
Yeah, there is. I digress.
I will
Off
say.
on a Last of Us tangent.
But well, I mean, The Last of Us is another world which has some pretty great world building, I think. Great. And
Another podcast.
another podcast episode, y'all. Tune in for The Last of Us. We should honestly like maybe we can break down the show,
Yes.
but I will say is that it is another example of something that's some great world building, and I think the aspects there is a degree of political structure and history and science there, right? Which
Hmm.
science is actually another interesting one that doesn't come up very often. Cordyceps is a real fungus.
Yeah.
What it says it does to plants and bees and whatnot, it's actually true.
Yeah.
100% that's what cordyceps does. Um,
It reminds me of a book I read once when I was in high school. I think it was called Agent Orange.
okay.
And it was about, like, it freaked me the hell out. Are we allowed to curse on this podcast?
I mean, I'm a cursing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I was like, that freaked me the fuck out.
Yeah.
Because, like, it was about that. It was about brain eating, like, amoeba that, like, controlled you. And it was so cool. You gotta read it if you get a chance. Maybe not, because
So
I was
children,
on the
if you have
team,
any
but
children who are listening to this podcast, just so you know, we're both from Philadelphia. We both cuss a lot. I mean,
oh,
Emily
yeah.
Emily did go to the shithole state of New Jersey, but which is kind of
Listen, you could take the girl out of Philly, can't take Philly out of the girl. I'm not gonna say John, though. I'm not
John.
gonna say John. And what else do Philly people? Oh, I don't say water. Like
Water. I've never said that either.
you never
No, I never said water. I've always said water. Yeah.
always.
Yeah, always.
You're not a real Philadelphian. Just kidding.
I suspect it has something to do with the school I went to, but that that
Oh, yeah.
that we will save for my podcast on hyper elitist schools. So yeah, The Last of Us is very believable. A similar vein. I mean, Agent Orange I've never read, but have you ever read World War Z? That's another one.
No,
The
but I only watched the movie.
movie is okay. The movie is shit compared to the book. Like
That's great because I still like the movie, but to be fair, I watched it when I was a teen. So
the movie, it's a good film. It's just not. Read the book. It's very, very, very different, and they did not do the book justice. Like
wasn't the book written like a log, like a
the book,
journal?
the book is basically a series of interviews. And
Okay.
it is very, very. It is not an action film in the slightest, and
Oh, interesting.
it really dives into like. And this is why it's such a great example for world building. And if we're talking about ones that are grounded with our reality, it really dives into how a pandemic destroys the world and how society sort of unravels, how governments fail miserably. And what makes it so prescient, this book was written a long time ago.
Mhm.
And it actually, if you read it closely, it mirrors what happened with the COVID pandemic.
When was it written?
2006, 2005.
Yeah. I
It
was
was
gonna
like,
say that like it probably pulled from historical, like I'm thinking of the Spanish flu.
I was thinking SARS as well. So the
Oh yeah,
pandemic
there you go.
that book also originates in China. China also covers it up. There are a lot of parallels. If you haven't read it, dear listeners, you really should. It's a very good book. My girlfriend's an epidemiologist and is like, yeah, it's actually a required reading for epidemiologists.
Well,
It's
could
very,
be.
yeah, it's very realistic. It's very, very realistic, actually.
Hmm.
Um, but it's about zombies, basically. It's a really good book. It's what makes that so believable is that it describes very much in detail how society then adapts to that's a very much of a hard world building example in that there are rules. It describes how society would realistically adapt and react to those rules. Now, I think we go more fantastical though, right? If we jump into something like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, I think it is the language. I think that that is what lends so much realism to that world, is that the language is what is the vehicle for creating, such a believable world. And then, of course, we have A Song of Ice and Fire, which history, lore, right? I mean, like that's the book that everyone goes to is like realistic politics, right?
Hmm. Yeah, they also had on the language topic, they had Valerian. I loved how they spoke it in the TV show. I thought that was really it
Uh,
was when every time Danny spoke in high Valerian or something. It was so cool.
you know
I
what's
love
fun? So you know what's funny? A fun fact for viewers and also or listeners and also for our co-host here. Valerian was not invented by George R. R. Martin. He just kind of put like a few words in. He
Uh-huh.
he never constructed languages the way Tolkien did.
So
Those
where did you get it from?
there was a dude they hired. I forget his name. Peter.
Ah.
He's very famous. If you look him up, he has several. I have some of his books actually on constructed languages. Conlang. I've done a little bit of that myself. He invented Dothraki, Valyrian. I think there's another language he invented too.
So you know
Um,
what this reminds me of? This actually reminds me of uh Arcane League of Legends, the TV show.
yes, yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry guys. Maybe spoiler, because I am gonna talk a little bit about the second season.
It's generally, if you're listening to this podcast, you should assume there's going to be spoilers.
Yeah, yeah, sorry. But like so in the second season, where there's a song where you hear like the children singing, it goes
I remember it. Yep.
you know that one? Yeah. So I watched a video on how they actually created that song. And so what the children are singing, they made up that language. They hired some guy to come in, make up that language, and it's
Oh, dude. And
yeah. So the children are like singing real like lyrics from a made up language, and
yeah.
it's supposed to be kind of like a it's not like a prayer, but I'll use the word prayer. That's the closest thing I can think of to is it Janus? Like the goddess in what's the undercity called again? I'm so bad.
Zon.
What was it?
Zon.
Zon, yes. So it's like a Zonite prayer to like the goddess that like makes clean air. But
Yeah,
it was really cool because I thought they were just saying gibberish. Like I didn't, but it was
the
genuinely a
perhaps,
language they made for that season.
and it's small touches like that, I think, that really make a world more believable, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That a lot in all of these examples, I bet you could find something like A Song of Ice and Fire has a lot of it. Dune famously does a lot of it with religion, right?
Hmm.
Um, and all of them, like in Lord of the Rings, has a lot of songs famously. Actually, like these are very definitely like things that you can eat that cross hard and soft world building because
Yeah,
it gives you that experiential consistency. And I guess it taps into like culture and religion, right? You know, what kind of gods would someone living in a undercity that has impure air? It's just
right,
pray to?
right.
God of clean air makes sense, right? I mean, what else would you pray to?
Right. It's actually interesting. You said the phrase experiential consistency. So that reminds me of like what makes for like a really good world. And so like one of the things that I would think makes for a really good world is kind of the ability for it to what was the I just lost my train of thought. I know what I'm trying to say and I don't have the words for it. The ability for it to continue through time and there's still the feeling that there's still more to the world that you haven't yet experienced.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, you still feel like you're in the same world. So there's nothing worse than having the like jarring experience of like, wait a minute, this doesn't thematically or this doesn't atmospherically feel like the same world that I'm in. And this isn't necessarily related to world building, but I'm thinking of music. So you were talking about the theme music for Game of Thrones. I'm thinking of the theme music for The White Lotus. So some
Oh
people
yeah,
might know the show.
yeah,
So the first two seasons of the show basically had a really like iconic soundtrack that went to it.
right.
They changed it for third season, and it everyone was already like, "Oh my God, why they change it? Where's the thing that we got used to?" And yeah, like I think it's a really important thing to think about for what makes a great world is that it should be consistent. It
Yeah,
should,
exactly.
however it made you feel that first time, it should make you feel that way throughout, despite having new things added onto it, despite it having potential for new things to be added on.
Absolutely. And I think that that's kind of like what's the most important thing for any world building, right? Is that whatever you're aiming to do with that world, that needs to be met
Yeah.
by these are all kind of just aspects, right? Like whether it's, geography or whatever, like creating a map that's believable or culture that makes it is interesting and kind of fits with the world you have. It's really just about like what is it you're aiming? And the other thing I actually want to put in, well, certainly there are stories out there that where the world kind of is the story. Um,
Mhm.
the best example of this is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Very good series. I haven't read all of them. The first book was phenomenal.
Mhm.
Um, where basically he's describing what if spiders became sentient. That's kind of my pitch to you. Um, is what that's what it is. But so that in that book, the world building basically is the story. But world building is a vehicle for your story, right? It's not meant to be necessarily like if we use like cars as kind of like the allegory or the metaphor here. The world building is kind of like the leather seats or the chassis, but your story is the engine, right? You know, it's what drives the vehicle, right? So you want it to match the feel, but remember that, like, I'm
Yeah.
serious.
No, I agree. I'm just laughing because I'm imagining if it didn't match. You know, I'm like imagining just like this like old clunky car and like the engine is like
Fall asleep. It's a thing. I mean,
continue, continue.
they look goofy as hell. I mean, I'm sure there are some car people who will disagree. Man, I think they look stupid,
Yeah,
but
just the record viewers, I don't know shit about cars.
I'm a car person.
I know if it looks pretty, and I'll be like, "Ooh, that's a nice looking car," but I don't. Good on those.
I'm a car person. But so I mean, like I think that that's kind of what's important, though, right? Is that you're building something that matches what you want to tell your story about. If you're writing a story about, how awful authoritarian systems are, but then like the world is this fucking utopia. I mean, like, don't be so surprised when your readers are rightly saying that, hey, I don't, right? I mean, a little bit of a contrived example, but you do see this sometimes in things. It is
Oh,
experiential
do you?
consistency.
Now I'm curious. Where have you seen that? That sounds hilarious.
Have I seen it somewhere? Okay, I will admit, I'm forced to admit that like I might have fibbed a little. I haven't personally seen it, but
Okay,
there's
this is going to be homework.
yeah.
Homework for our viewers. If you know of an instance in which the plot and setting don't make sense,
Look, they don't match. Please let us know.
they're mismatched.
Drop it in the comments below.
Yes, yes.
Please do, because I think we are all curious if that's such a.
Yeah, for sure.
But so I guess like now we can like move a little bit into actually building your world. So um I mean we talked a little bit like about about hard versus soft world building and all that. So I mean with building your own world, I mean we're kind of already touching on this a little bit. It's like what is the atmosphere you want to convey? And everything really beyond this is just kind of tools really for conveying
Hmm.
it, right? You know, I mean, some of the examples that are kind of interesting with this, I think personally, is, I mean, for those of you who are nerds like me, Warhammer 40K, the tabletop game, has a really interesting setting. And its setting is basically there to create the atmospheric consistency that this is a universe which is miserable to live in and is just endlessly at war. It's heavily militarized. And it makes sense for a tabletop game that's about war at the end of the day, right? It's a war game. Um, Cyberpunk stories will often have an atmosphere of also despair, but something more like along the lines of corporations take over. What does capitalism to its extreme look like? That's kind of their theme. Um, then we have a lot of dark examples here, don't we? I mean, if we're looking for something a little bit more positive, I guess. I mean, one of my favorite books I read recently was Legends and Lattes, which, in fairness, like that's probably a poor example of world building, but it does kind of dive into a little bit like how coffee would get introduced into a world like this, right? So it kind of keeps it fun and lighthearted, right? Like it's about, in finding meaning in something small as opening a coffee shop. And that's I think probably the more important thing. Now, beyond that, like, are you gonna go hard or soft? Are you gonna plan it all or pants it, which is an actual term, I kid you not.
I feel like we should put that on a t-shirt. Are you gonna go hard or soft?
I feel like that somebody is going to get like either made fun of or thrown out of an event for being vulgar.
T-shirts related to our podcast soon to
All right,
come.
get our merch store. Go hard or go soft? Question mark. Base emoji underneath it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so I was thinking actually, while you were talking, it made me think of um, what's the alternative to Goodreads that you recommended again? Storygraph. There we go. So on Storygraph, there's a question when you have to review a book and like how much you liked it or not. It asks you, was this character driven or was this plot driven? And I'm thinking that probably stories that are more plot driven, right? It's like, I guess more external things are happening in the plot. That that would require, in my opinion, if you're doing fantasy or sci-fi, a little bit more robust world building, as
Absolutely.
opposed, yeah, as opposed to the character-driven plots in which a lot of the changes and developments happen just internal to them. Um, but what I would say on the topic of getting started with world building, I really feel like just with writing a story, just with writing a book, a lot of this is really going to be your personal preference. I don't really think that there is like a right necessarily, a wrong way to do it, or a specific order you have to do it in. And furthermore, at least for my own experience, I have found that I have been world building in tandem with actually writing my book. So
Mhm.
I'll give an example of why. For example, if I'm like, okay, I want to accomplish this particular thing in my scene, right? And I want my character to have go to a new place, maybe see a new character, maybe meet a new character. Maybe there's going to be an offshoot of this subset of the plot that I want to do. I'm going to want to add that into my world because now this new place is going to exist. But I'm going to want to make a log of it and keep track of that because this is now a part of my world.
Right.
Maybe I didn't know that when I was first writing my first draft. You know what I mean? So basically, give yourself room and time and space to just come up with things as they come and just, I would say, keep it organized because if the more you go down that route, it can
Absolutely.
get a little bit overwhelming.
I mean, and like you said, personal preference is definitely a big part of it. It's also
Yeah.
stylistic. Some people plan everything before they start writing. So
Yeah.
we'll just kind of start writing, and that's what I was saying, planner versus pantser. Like, are you planning? Or are you like flying by the seat of your pants, right?
Wait,
It's
wait, wait, wait. Or is it, are you planning it or what?
flying by the seat of your pants. It's a real thing. I kid you not. I was at
No,
a
I'm laughing because when I saw you write pantser, sorry, when I think pantser, I think of someone like going up to someone just like, like
dear listeners, when I say pantser, I do not mean a writer that's grabbing your pants and yanking them down. That is Neil Gaiman.
we should put that on the other t-shirt. Are you planning? Oh my God. Okay.
We're
Whew.
cracking ourselves up here.
Yes, I'm an expert at cracking myself up because listen, if no one else is gonna do it, I'm still gonna be laughing.
I mean, I'm basically a comedian as well, so okay,
Yes.
okay, don't be Neil Gaiman. Don't grab and yank down people's pants. That is not what I meant by pantser. So, no, I did not invent these terms. I was actually at an event where R.R. Verdi was speaking. So if you don't know R.R. Verdi, he's a local DC area guy. He's writing these novels, Tales of Trevelyan, something like that. I feel so bad because I actually like met and talked to this guy for so long, but he has
He's
two
gonna
novels.
judge you super hard when he listens to your podcast.
He's gonna be like this fucker. There's two novels so far on this trilogy. I think he's doing. The first one is The First Binding. The second one is The Doors of Midnight. I'm still reading the second one.
Hmm.
Um, if you're curious about checking it out, my pitch to you is imagine the King Killer Chronicles, but basically set in like South Asian, in more of a South Asian cultural vibe. They are quite similar and they're pretty good, I'd say. Just bear in mind it is a very similar novel, so if you want looking for something different, it's not too different. Um, but like it was at that event that like the facilitator was like, "Are you a planner or a pantser?" I'm like, "I had never heard this before," and today I learned it's an actual thing, right? Um,
I feel like
so
it's sorry, this is like I'm just getting really distracted here, but like I feel like I would be like, are you a planner or are you a winger? Like wing it.
oh, I thought you said winner, and I'm like, winner, man. Now we've just gotten into like toxic masculinity style, like they like, are you a planner or are you a winner?
No toxic
Who
masculinity on this podcast. We have
fucking
enough
plans things?
podcasts full of that.
Real men wing it. We're very
You're
liberal, dear listener.
you're welcome, viewers. You just got to hear me snort. I snort laugh, so you'll soon learn.
Dear listener, just as a disclaimer, we are both very liberal. I'm just making fun of the idea of like some like, absurd, fragile ego dude being like, wing it, don't plan it.
Don't plan it. Planning is for pussies.
I could see somebody saying it. But no, but like, this is really personal preference. Like, there are people who, I mean, it's kind of like, do you plan your day out ahead of time or do you just kind of, figure it out as you go? It's same.
Sometimes I do in my wildest fantasies. The ironic part about us talking about planning versus pantsing, I suppose, as it
Keep
were.
saying that. You're gonna keep saying that. I'm gonna keep laughing, and I think like,
I know it's so funny. Is that I actually like I would describe myself as like a recovering type A person. So for me, when I wanted to go into this, in theory, planning everything in advance was like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna do that and it's gonna be great. And then as I continued writing the book, I'm like, oh shit, like I can't do that. Like that doesn't even make sense. I'm gonna have to
no,
be
no.
open to things just changing along the way. And so I guess if you want to make like a metaphor of like writing a book and world building, it's kind of like life, like shit's gonna happen. You're gonna have to adjust. You're gonna sit at your desk one day and be like, oh man, like that place was crap. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of that. But that doesn't make sense. Okay, let's get rid of. Wait, but you know what? Now they should be in this new tavern, which is beside this castle, which is on the other side of the world, and you're gonna be able to put it there. So I just feel like if you're gonna go in thinking, oh, you know what? I'm gonna be a pantser. Oh, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna be a planner. You know what? You might be halfway through your book and you're gonna be like, oh, actually, not as much as I thought.
Yeah, man, that can happen. I 100% agree. I
Yeah.
will say like a lot of things, as with all things. Like, I mean, I alluded to this earlier, but everyone sort of starts somewhere with any story, right? Like, I mean, Tolkien famously started with languages. I don't know what George R. R. Martin started with, but I think he started with the question of like, what if I took Lord of the Rings but made it more real, basically? And like, there are different aspects that people just start with. I mean, I'm actually a visual artist mostly. I mean, I do write a lot nowadays, but like for me, my digital work is kind
Thought
of
you were an auditory artist.
an auditory artist.
Sorry, I just
Isn't that just called a musician? For, dear listeners, Emily over here is a very elitist, snooty, person here who just loves inventing words. An auditory artist is otherwise known as a musician.
I'm only just like saying random shit that pops into our head sometimes, not gonna lie.
It's okay. You're in New Jersey. We understand.
Oh, you know what? I'm not even offended. That's fair.
So, so I think like what I'm saying though is that like people start somewhere they like, right? For me, it's like a design typically. The story I'm currently writing is features a lot of mecha combat, and it started because I made a model of a mech. Literally, like I just one day was like, I want to make a combat robot mech thing.
You
And
made a model of a mech.
yeah, like a 3D piece.
No, I'm amused by the alliteration. Sorry.
I think you're just falling apart now. It's
Sorry, continue.
all good. It's all
I'm a
good.
little bit of a troll. Sorry.
All right, I troll a lot too, but I think
Okay. Troll.
I think it's just karma coming back to bite me. Like I'm actually saying something serious, and I'm getting trolled. It's like,
No, see, the thing is the fact that just like I'm so used to talking to you in general that like I have to sometimes I forget like wait, we're actually recording a podcast.
yeah, dear listener, this is our dynamic in real life, unfiltered.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
We-
like actually a lot more serious on the podcast than I probably would be in real life.
It's true. If you see some of our conversations, they literally just devolve into you owe me money for being late, and then the other person's like, really, I do. Can you accept payment in this? And I'm like, no, I'm sending this agency. They just
He
turn
doesn't accept payment in schmeckles, guys. Like what the hell?
Schmeckles are not a real currency. I'm just putting that out there. It sounds Loki. It sounds a little vulgar, but um,
You know what? I wouldn't even be shocked because it came from the Rick and Morty universe. So like,
I mean, it just makes me think of Click, that Adam Sandler film where he's like, my Schmeckles got larger, and that's just the first thing that comes to mind. Is like
ah, no, I have to rewatch that movie.
not a great film, but like I remember as a teenager being amused. Right, but on a topic of actually world building and not troll building. But yeah, no, like I mean, maybe it just starts with a map. Maybe it starts with a magic system idea or some sort of history thing, right? You know, and I do agree. Like for those of you who want to plan everything, don't want to stop you, right? But you're gonna probably start writing things. You're gonna find yourself adjusting, and maybe that's okay. Maybe you just want a framework. For pantsers, I'll bet that the problem you might run into if you're doing things a little bit more, as you go, is that you kind of find yourself writing yourself into corners, or you find yourself doing things a little bit inconsistently.
I
So,
was gonna say that if you're a pantser, I hope you like puzzles.
the
Sorry, I'm laughing because I
puzzle,
saw your face.
I'm just thinking the puzzle of pulling down someone's pants, but
You pull down someone's pants and a puzzle pops out.
I have so many questions.
Okay, wait, no, seriously. I was gonna say it makes sense. I hope you like puzzles because basically, like what Kunal was saying, you could write yourself into a corner, or you could just be like, "Oh, how do I make this make sense?" So, like, I've actually been there where I'm like, "Ooh, shit! Like, I wrote this already, and that doesn't make logical sense with this other thing." And so then I literally spent like a few minutes just sitting there thinking, "How can I make it make sense?" If you're excited to do that, then pants are all the way. If you're someone that's like, oh God, like I don't want to have to waste time sitting there thinking about how am I going to make it work, then you might want to do a little more planning in advance.
Well, I will say, I think that like you can benefit even if you're just gonna like you're okay with kind of winging it. You can benefit with a little bit of planning, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think like, to get back to our sort of like touchstone, right? What is your story about, right? That's kind of what's really important. If you're
Yeah.
writing a story about, how oranges are dictatorial, right? For example, or
How
I'm
oranges are what?
or dictatorial, right? I'm making a not so subtle dig at a certain person.
Oh, got it. Sorry. Brain was stuck on the fruit. I got you.
But or if you're making like, a story or writing a story about like, let's say, I don't know, the immigrant experience, which is kind of what I'm doing a little bit, right? You would want your world to support that. Maybe I don't want to say reflect. I want to say I think like support is the right word, right? So whatever your style is for building a world, that's kind of got to be your touchstone. So you will, even if you're completely winging it, chances are you have some idea of what you're envisioning the end product to look down. I
Yeah.
would highly, highly recommend just putting that down in a notebook somewhere. And
Hmm.
like almost like a constitution, if you will. I got the political allegories, they're just coming out of me.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what happens when you live in Washington, D.C. long enough. You just become a drone that keeps relating life to politics and history. Even though I don't work in any of those fields of work. But no, seriously, like, jokes aside, like it's almost like your touchstone, your lodestone, like your North Star. You want that somewhere for everything. And again, the world's only as good as its story, right? Like if you have a fantastic world which has, really interesting things to say about dragons as a metaphor for nuclear weapons and how there's wealth inequality because of who has dragons and who doesn't. But your story is complete garbage. Like nobody cares about the character. You think the character is just, unrelatable or etc. It's not going to matter how good your world is. A good story can be brought down by bad world building and like if it's horribly inconsistent and whatnot, yeah, it's going to bring down your story. But
On the flip side, if you have an amazing world, but your writing skills are kind of not there, that can also sort of be your Achilles heel as well. I'm just saying that as like from the writer perspective because again, I don't really know if I want to put what I'm thinking of on blast, but I have read books where it's like, oh, this is actually really cool, but oh my God, like I can't get through a few pages of this. Like it's just not, it doesn't flow well.
maybe this will be a podcast where we talk about books we just didn't like and just shit on
Oh
them.
my God, yeah. Yeah.
I am going to be a little bit more forward and actually mention books that I think that had.
Well, I'm just okay, listen, guys, I haven't published this yet, and I'm actually trying to like make this like for real, like my career. Like I want to be a writer. So the reason why I'm kind of nervous is like I don't want I don't
Some
want
author to
you
listen.
coming at me and be
Oh,
like,
hey,
you bitch.
poor R.R. Verity, if he ever
I put
listens
my
to
heart
this.
and soul into that book and you just said it was like shit. Oh my God. Like
Oh,
I don't want to make enemies.
poor R.R. Verity. If he's listening to this podcast, I already tripped up the name of his trilogies. I'm sorry.
Wait, can I? Okay, but actually, I don't know if I should say this because I really love The Witcher.
Oh yeah, this is the one we talked about. Yeah, yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I don't want Andrei Sapkowski being pissed off at me.
So, okay, I mean, I will give my thoughts, and actually, I think The Witcher is a really great example for this
Hmm.
world building podcast, and we can talk about it.
Yeah, the world's amazing.
The Witcher is, well, I have a lot of thoughts on it, right? Like, I think the world is very, very cool and interesting. There's a lot going on there. Like, if you look at just the beats of the world, and chances are, for most people who were introduced to The Witcher in the West, they were introduced through the games, actually.
Yeah,
Um, I admittedly, I don't think the books are actually all that compelling.
yeah,
And I think that Sapkowski actually does a great job of crafting, I think, a interesting story too. I just don't think it lands somehow. Um, and I don't know if Sapkowski's listening to random podcasters on the internet, but um,
if you are listening, don't be mad at us. Also, we're huge fans. Oh, you
we
can't see me. I just did a little heart emoji.
we do actually love The Witcher, right? Like we both love
Yeah, we
it.
both love The Witcher.
It's just that I think that, especially the earlier books, the writing doesn't always land for me, and I bet you some of that is it's lost in translation.
Yeah,
Some
that's
of
what I was thinking too. Yeah, because the original was in Polish, so I was like,
so
yeah,
I mean, and not to kind of make this about me again, but I mean, we love talking about ourselves, aren't we? I mean, narcissistic.
sheesh, you know.
No, but jokes aside, like, but I did do like a small experiment as part of my writing workshop I'm in. I wrote a piece in one of my native languages, Punjabi. It was fully written in Punjabi. I actually wrote it out, and then I translated it to English to get that feel of this was in universe in the Warhammer 40K universe. Intercept was being translated by these dudes, and then
Mhm.
I had to see like what's going on here. Um, you can lose a lot in translation. It's very, very hard to capture the richness of a language.
Right.
Like there are things in Punjabi and Hindi that just do not exist in English, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Polish is probably a little bit easier, I bet, because it's still a European language, right? But
I'm, mhm.
but I wouldn't be surprised if there's actually a lot there. I'm not a Polish speaker, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
I
I thought about this because again, like I'm working on a book and my husband's family, they live in Russia and like they've been asking me about the book since I've been writing it and I would love to share with them, but like I I don't speak Russian and I don't know anyone who would be able to capture all the nuances of everything I put into the book into Russian. And let me tell you right now, if you put into Google Translate, it does not do it. It does not. It's not good. So
like that actually, and I mean not to sort of nerd out, but the scientific models, the translation models they're using, they're not really built to capture nuance. They're getting
yeah.
better. ChatGPT and whatnot probably could do it if you asked it. It would be okay. But I would bet that it would also struggle and whatnot. But so the point, like with The Witcher, though, right, is that the world is functionally quite amazing. It's using mythology that's kind of unknown to a lot of Western audiences. That mythos being like, Eastern European, medieval Eastern European myths and whatnot, and like ideas like Strigas and I forget all of them now. But I think fundamentally, like we lose some things in translation for
Baba
one.
Yaga.
Baba Yaga, that's another one. Yep. We lose
Mhm.
some things in translation for one. For another, that's a series of books that does feel a little bit like it's talking at you. Show, don't tell, I think is kind of the principle, kind of
Yep.
a
Yep.
little lost in those books.
And it's really easy to slide into telling. It's
Yeah.
really,
It
yeah.
very much is easy to slide into. Like, I try my best not to, even as a writer myself. I'm working on my own novel project, but it's easy. And the thing is, if you're gonna tell, I would say, I mean, not to digress, if you're gonna tell, there should be a good reason to tell. Like, if someone's writing in a diary, that's where you're gonna see a little bit more tell than show. But I digress. Um, but so what's interesting about, I think, that world, I'd actually be very curious what the core principle of that world is. Like I think the idea of that world is basically that you have a class of people who are reviled but are essential, actually. And it's a really fascinating concept, right? Because that mirrors real world in many ways,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
actually, I never thought about that. Yeah.
it seems to be the core thematic premise of it. Like, what if
Yeah.
you had these guys who are basically mercenary. They're absolutely there just to make money. And people revile them for it because they're these freaks that are highly trained and they're scared of them actually a little bit too. But at the same time, it's like, well, we need them. I mean, who's going to kill the monsters for us, right? And there's some pretty deep politics in there as well, almost Game of Thrones levels of politics, actually. Uh,
Hmm.
so I would say that, like, you know, that's an example of it's a strong world, I think. I actually don't think it's a particularly weak world.
No.
The story is just not the best executed, and I suspect that a part of the reason the shows are struggling a little bit now is primarily that reason. The story itself, the actual beats of it, are just not super interesting, I think. Um,
Yeah, it's no, it's not. So the books themselves, I noticed that a lot of it was told in like short story format, like back to back to
yeah,
back, like
yeah,
little, yeah, and so that kind of the breakup of the continuity of the story, the lack of the flow was really
it
jarring
hurt.
for me.
Yeah. I mean, if we're gonna keep like talking about examples of like not so great world building, or not so, or like where world building execution matters. Man, I feel bad, but Neil Stephenson is an author who's some of his books I do like actually. He does a lot of cyberpunk and a lot of speculative sci-fi and all that. So he had one book called Seven Eves, the principle of which I think his name is Neil Stephenson. The principle of the book basically is that the moon basically just breaks apart one day. Like a comet goes through it and it just snaps apart. And it's basically about how does society try to survive after that? And then what does society look like 200 years later? Really, really fascinating concepts, some really deep world building, deep science. You know, the biggest problem is the world was over explained. Like, he spent like a good 3 pages explaining this orbital launch hand mechanism thing. And I'm like, I fucking don't care.
Don't care. Yeah.
Like beyond a point. I just want to know, what does this orbital ring sphere thing look like that's around the Earth now? What's the culture there? What are these? The idea of that book is really interesting, is that there's only seven women left alive at the end of it, all these things after that, and they become the progenitors for the rest of humanity by doing virgin births, basically. There's some science in there. And like they create seven whole races, basically, that can trace their lineage to these seven people.
Mhm.
Um, I want to know more about, what does that society look like, right? Who are the characters and whatnot, right? And
Mhm.
there is some of that, but like it's over-explained. So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, from that example, Neil Stephenson has some good books. If you haven't read Snow Crash, it's a great book. What I am saying though is that you should be careful of that trap, right? Where you're over-explaining things that don't matter. You're focusing too much on the world. Even if the world is your story, readers care about arcs, right? We want to know if, like, say, a civilization is the character, like in the Foundation series. That's kind of what it is, and that's also a series that not everyone really likes, by the way.
So one thing that actually helped me to not over explain or even over tell as like opposed to show is sometimes literally just imagine the scene that you're writing as a scene in a movie.
Yeah,
Because
I agree.
if you're watching a movie, there's not some invisible narrator in the movie that's just gonna spend the first 5 minutes of the movie telling you about the world.
Exactly.
It's not gonna happen.
Exactly.
That's not how movies work. And yet people still enjoy movies and like watching them. So think about it from that perspective as an author, so that nothing is explained or showed that your character can't see. Everything's going to be more from your character. And so when you make it more grounded in your character's perspective, that really helps a lot because your character is not just randomly going to go off on tangents about how the world works.
Yeah, that would be kind of weird, right? Like, I mean, and also, like, imagine it. I mean, to that point, I'd also say, imagine it as if this was a real conversation. Like, you're
Right.
like, let's say you're sitting in a bookshop or at a cafe, you're sipping a coffee, you're maybe in the story, there's like these two dudes who are conferring on what to do next. They're not going to sit there and be like, oh, so by the way, did you know that the system of government works as follows? There's three branches of government. There's the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And then this is how a bill, and then we have that whole song about like how a bill goes from into law and all that. But that's not going to happen, right? You
Unless you're in a classroom, I guess.
well, in that case, you're not really writing a book. You're just
Yeah,
writing
you're just
entertaining education. Um, but so I guess like the other side of that comes in, is that the flip side of it is then, like, how deep should a world be, right? Probably a question that many people have, and I don't know. I think that that's kind of my
depends. It depends on what you're going for,
yeah.
really. Just know that the deeper the world goes, the like it should make sense. If you, there's, I guess there's, to be fair, there's certain things on the back end of my world that I've built out. I know I keep it in the back of my mind, and maybe readers who read my book will feel some sort of sense of consistency, even if they don't know exactly why, because I know when I wrote the book. But at the same time, it's just like, listen, if you don't want, if you don't want to make it that deep of a world and it's not necessary to make your story cohesive and make sense and engaging, then you don't need to invest in it. It's
Absolutely.
really up to you.
And I think a great example of a world that has very little actual depth to it, but is still loved by many, a little bit of a controversial author, not a little bit, very controversial author now. It's actually Lovecraft. Lovecraft
Wait,
is,
controversial now.
he's very controversial.
Why?
He's a raging racist.
Oh.
Yeah, he was
Did
he
not know that. I heard he was controversial, but I didn't know the reason.
oh yeah, well he is actually he was more racist than racist in his day. Um
Really?
yeah, he was pretty extreme. Like, he toned down over towards the end of his life, but he was not a good person. Like, I
Oof.
really would not have liked to have known him. And for those of you listeners who don't know, like, we're both like not white, right? So like it's the kind of thing that, like, from our perspective especially, it's like kind of uncomfortable. And some of his stories do reference it a little bit. I think one of them, the Mountain of Madness, something like that. There's actually a talk about lesser races falling to Cthulhu because they're not as well developed as white
My
people.
God.
Yeah.
Not subtle at all.
No, yeah, it's not subtle. Like, there are
Jeez.
definitely. he is virulently racist. It's really
Okay.
unfortunate because the stories themselves are quite good.
You know,
I,
that could be a whole podcast. Sorry to cut you off, but like about racism in like past classics, past like
yeah,
really
yeah,
masterpieces. Because this is making me think of All the King's Men, which I read like 2, 3 years ago. Okay, I didn't like the book like anyway. The guy was like a poet laureate, the guy who wrote it. He was a poet laureate, and it was like okay, but something that just like really struck me as I was reading it was just the amount of like N words that were dropped, and just
yeah.
how
Well,
despicable women were treated. And
well,
I was like, I mean, I guess it's like really, it's very flowery,
yeah.
very well constructed language, but
I guess
like,
it'd be interesting to tie that in, right? Is also like
yeah,
depictions of like awful things in fiction, like treatment of women in like A Song of Ice and Fire is a very controversial topic even now.
yeah,
Huckleberry Finn, actually, if you want to get into that, that's another book with
yeah.
a lot of language of using the N word and where the slave character, I forget his name now, he's depicted kind of as an idiot, actually. Um,
Mm,
and so but even though that book was actually quite progressive for its time, ironically enough, there are things that it was still kind of behind on.
mm.
Um, but so I think like what is interesting on our sort of current topic. I mean, we have a lot of new podcast ideas clearly. Um, I think what's sort of interesting on our current topic, right, like, is that just keep in mind that beyond a point, like what I was gonna say, like I think like for Lovecraft's books don't even necessarily have strong character development. They are about the horror and existential dread. Sorry, stories, not books, but they're about the horror and existential dread of living in a inherently unknowable, not understandable universe that doesn't give a shit. Like the elder gods, Cthulhu, these are such powerful beings that to them humans are just specks of dust in essence, right? But there's not actually a lot of strong, consistent world building in these books. They are very different, or in these stories, sorry. These stories are very different, and the mythos is not something like, Song of Ice and Fire, where there's a very clear system of government and all that, right? They're very soft. It's just, again, experiential consistency. You can achieve these goals in both. I mean, I guess you can kind of see which way I sort of lean. I don't really personally prefer to really have very fleshed out every little thing. There are readers, especially for those who love Brandon Sanderson. I don't know if you've read Brandon Sanderson, Emily, but
No, I haven't.
he's very much known as the hard magic guy. He
Mm,
has entire glossaries in the backs of his books that describe to you how the magic systems work.
mm,
Um, and there's like a logic to it and whatnot. I personally am not a huge fan of these. I think it sort of distracts from A, from the story, and B, also just kind of gets rid of the wonder of a universe. But there are people who like it, and Brandon Sanderson is very, very successful as a
mm.
result.
Sorry, sorry, I had briefly looked up H.P. Lovecraft because you
Oh,
were telling me about his past. I was like, what is this guy's deal? He died young. He
yeah.
was like 46 years old. Apparently, he grew up wealthy, and then after his grandfather passed. Sorry, that's
He has H.P. Lovecraft is interesting. Like for those of you
yeah.
who are fans, he also, interestingly enough, has a pretty large influence on Miyazaki's works for Bloodborne, Elden Ring.
See that. I can see that.
Yeah. Also, and one of an interesting thing I'll put in there, we talk about like how much is necessary. That's another great example in Elden Ring, right? So Hidetaka Miyazaki, people I've often asked him, how did you come up with this style for world building?
Mhm.
His style for world building, where it comes from, is that, and so obviously he's Japanese, right? He doesn't really speak very good English, or he didn't, but he loved reading English language fantasy books, and he couldn't understand all of it. So he presents the world to us in item descriptions and fragments, kind of as the way it was presented to him as a kid.
Hmm.
Um, so there's the question of like, to go deep or not, and how deep is enough. It's a hard one, right? I don't think that there really is. You're laughing, I see it. She's just dying.
Sorry, I'm being a child. Sorry.
There's a that's what she said joke in there somewhere.
Dude, you did three back to back to back. Okay, continue.
We should change our podcast name to, children disguised as adults making inappropriate jokes.
No, it should be like absolutely without question two adults.
Two adults. I don't believe it
Too
for
adult.
I don't believe it for a minute. Um, but no, but like the question is like, do you no, I can't even say this with a straight face. Like how much depth should there be in your world, right? It's very hard to answer that because it really just depends on what the story demands. You can make a very good character-driven story, and I bet you don't even need to have much going on in the world. I
No,
would,
you definitely don't.
and I would argue Harry Potter, again, great example, probably does not, J.K. Rowling probably did not have an answer for every question you have, right?
You know what
But
I'm thinking of when you're talking about not a very in-depth world, but like still enough to just get the readers like super hooked? The Giver by Judy Blume. I know it's a kid's book, so I know I read it as an adult. It didn't, wasn't as cool as it was when I was a kid. But like I would argue that
there's not
the
much going
world
on.
building there was almost nothing. It was just okay, things are black and white and
There's
like
a basic magic system of like memory.
yeah, it was yeah. And that book where it was very successful. I mean, granted, again, it is for kids, but like that's like the softest world building you got.
And not like world building the that book when I read it growing up. But in fairness, I also read it as part of class. So, but
Uh,
you are right. It is a cornerstone of literature. People do regard it very highly, and that is a masterclass of like very little world building. But there's still a world experience
yeah.
there. So there's no right answer, I think, to world building. The real, I mean, we kind of keep breaking people's head over the head with this, which is like, consistency. That's really all that really matters. If
Yeah.
it feels consistent, and this is kind of where I think, maybe alpha readers come in and getting other sort of communities involved or like, being part of workshops. If people
Hmm.
feel like, no, this feels consistent, chances are that you're probably fine, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't think of anything that would be an example against that.
Yeah, and this is such a big topic,
I
right?
think the big thing, this is so cliche, but just have fun.
Yeah, no,
Have,
really.
have the most fun.
No, really, I think so. I agree, right? Like, I mean, I've probably done more world building than I've done actual writing. Um, no, I'm dead serious. Like, I've probably built like three worlds by now. Three, four.
Wow.
It's just what I enjoy doing more of. I mean, and in many ways, that experience is more fun than, say, the actual writing itself. But so, yeah, I mean, just have at it. I mean, like, if you want a world in which, like, there's floating islands.
Yeah. And I would say on that note, like lean into your interests. So like if you like history, then like lean into that. If you like magic, lean into building out a really robust magic system for your world. If you just really like maps, like lean into that.
Or, maybe you like incestuous proto elves who rule with dragons, otherwise known as Game of Thrones. Lean into
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't think it's George R. R. Martin. We love your books here, but
Oh yeah. Oh my God. If George R. R. Martin listens to our podcast, I think I'm gonna die.
I would be like, wow, what a moment.
Oh my God, yes.
That
That would be something
would
like
be a dream come
check
true.
off my bucket list.
Yep,
George R. R. Martin gives a shit what I think.
now George R. R. Martin knows how immature Kunal and Emily really
I
are.
know. Two adults, without question.
Yeah, one of them's making that's what she should said jokes the whole time. The other one's like
I didn't actually say it. Those words came from your mouth.
she was if you see the video, she was like holding a laugh back when I say how deep do you go? She's like just like barely suppressing a laugh, and I'm like, all right, just let it out, Anchor. Like just let it out. Let the energy
I'm a closeted Michael Scott. Sorry,
be horrible. But
you've been warned.
concludes this podcast. So
Yeah.
all right, folks. Happy Earth Day, dear
Happy
lovable
Earth
and
Day,
unlovable Earthlings. Once more, please do ask your
Earthlings.
are lovable or unlovable. That's a question for your therapist. Maybe he or she can
If
tell you.
you're unlovable, we still want you to listen to us. We'll love you.
We'll try to love you, maybe.
Okay, well, I'll love you since Kunal doesn't want to commit.
I'm not. Commitment's not my thing. Let's be honest. I am the flakiest of flake here. But please do like and subscribe and share on whatever platform you're listening to this to. We haven't quite gotten around to putting these on YouTube or whatever, but we will be doing that.
We will. We will soon. So
George R. R.
Yeah, let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What
George R.
worlds are you
R.
working on? What worlds are you thinking about? What are your favorite worlds? What worlds didn't go well? Like, let us know what you think. Anything?
And
Yeah.
George R. R. Martin, if you're listening to this, I'm not going to ask you for the winds of winter. Have fun with your life. We like you. We love you.
I might, but I would understand if you said no.
It's hard. We get it. It's a hard life. Yeah.
It is. It is.
But Patrick Rothfuss, if you're listening, dude, what the fuck?
Oh my God.
I mean, I know, double standard here. I just said George R. R. Martin, go have a fun life, and I thought Patrick Rothfuss, dude, what the fuck? But
I was like, I know, right?
it might, maybe it shows you which book series I'm more invested in. Sorry, George R. R. Martin.
Wait, no, I actually kind of want his book to come out, but I know it's not going to happen, so it's all right, dude.
It's all
It's all
good.
right. Keep working on all the other millions of projects you've got. It's all good.
All good. I mean, you did do Elden Ring, which is pretty amazing.
Which I am very appreciative of. That was awesome.
Well, it's definitely awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so goodbye to everyone else also. Not we're not just talking to George R. R. Martin.
But really we are. We're just kind of fanboying and throwing over these authors. But no, have a good life, everyone, between this podcast and the next one. And if you don't, well, find a good therapist. It is
All
pretty
right.
dark days. All right, guys. Peace out,
All
y'all.
right. Peace
See
out,
y'all in the
guys.
next one. And